So in this video, we're going to be going over artworks from the High Renaissance as well as artworks in Mannerism. So let's get into our first artwork. And this is just a quick review. Not every single detail is in this video, but it's mostly just keynotes to remember. So starting with The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. This is from 1495 to 1498, and it's an oil on tempera on plaster. So tempera is kind of an egg wash material that's used in a lot of Renaissance artwork because people started experimenting more with their mediums and how they would make this art. And Leonardo actually did use his own experimental technique but involving a double layer of dried plaster and an undercoat of lead white, resulting in vulnerability to humidity. So this painting actually grew mold on it a few times and it did have to be restored. And there is a digital reconstruction online if you want to look at it. But let's get into more of the context. So this has a lot of geometry and it's more classical. We can see that it's almost perfect in the way there's like a lot of balance, a lot of symmetry, and there's kind of like light and shadow play a role in it as well. We also see that all the apostles have their own distinct features, which is something that Leonardo wanted them to have. They wanted them to be kind of more biblically accurate. There's also a coffered ceiling in the back, and you can see that there is a balanced composition formed by an equilateral triangle on Christ's body. He sits below an arching pediment that traces a circle, and there's many ideal geometric forms. We can also see in the background an idyllic and peaceful setting, which is present in a lot of biblical and historic artwork. It's kind of paradise. It's like this calm state and background. And we also see that in the Madonna with two children. I believe that's the name of the work, but we can also see a similar background in that. We also see a symbolic kind of invisible halo over Christ's head. You can barely see it, but Leonardo did intend it to be there. There's also some symbols in this. So the window and arching pediment suggest the halo. So that's why there's an arching pediment. The function of this artwork was it was painted for the dining hall of an abbey where friars lived, and it was commissioned for the monastery of Santa Maria della Grazie in Milan. So let's go over to our next artwork, which is the Sistine Chapel painted by Michelangelo. It's a fresco, and this is the outside of the chapel, but we'll get into the artworks on the inside. These frescoes are mostly from the Old Testament, and actually, most of them depict Adam and Eve. So they're all from the Old Testament, and some of them depict famous stories such as Noah and the flood, the fall of man, and prophets and sibyls. So these are our three kind of frescoes in the AP Art History curriculum. On the very left, we have the Delphic Sibyl. So this is kind of demonstrating a Sibyl who was Delphic, and Sibyls were female seers from ancient times who believed to foretell the coming of Christ. We can see though that she has more masculine features such as her arms because Michelangelo did have a preference for like sculpting, and especially he sculpted men like David, which is a famous statue sculpted by him. So we can see she has more masculine features. To the very middle, we have the Last Judgment painting. On the left are all of those who are going to hell, the damned, and on the right are the blessed who are going to heaven. Mary kind of looks down at the blessed, and angels blow their trumpets below Christ. And then the painting to the very right is the deluge. Let's now talk about some of the form on these paintings. We're seeing kind of a limited color palette. We're also seeing precise contour lines and three-dimensionality. We're seeing a fresco technique, and most importantly, high contrast and chiaroscuro. So chiaroscuro is the play of light and shadow, and it basically just enhances the figures. We're also seeing the illusion of depth. So the function of this artwork was it was commissioned by Pope Julius II to embellish the chapel's interior with a grand artistic vision. And Pope Julius did commission most religious artworks for the 15 through 1600s, or just mainly 1500s. So yeah, that's who commissioned it. Let's move on to our third artwork. This is the School of Athens painted by Raphael. It's a fresco, And this is the fresco depicting philosophy. So there were four frescoes in the library, also commissioned by Pope Julius, or sorry, yeah, commissioned again by Pope Julius. And this was for his private library located in the papal apartments. There was one of four. There was like a mythology one, a theology one, and this is just the philosophy one. And there were also a poetry and justice. But we can see here, let's get into more of the content of this artwork. We can see Plato and Aristotle are in the very center of the painting, and they are just engaged in a deep conversation. Then we have Socrates, who is shown separately engaged in conversation with a group of young students. He is often identified by his distinctive pose and the cup, referring to his method of questioning. We also have the ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes. He is portrayed lying on the steps in the lower left corner holding a bowl. His inclusion adds an element of contrast, representing a different philosophical approach. We have Echolid, who is actually very easy to see because he's kind of bending down. His knee or leg is kind of like crossed, and he is depicted writing on a slate, symbolizing the importance of geometry and math. We also have a self portrait of Raphael. He's in the very back corner, and he included a portrait of himself and the renowned artist Michelangelo, who was the last painter of the Sistine Chapel. And he basically wanted to pay homage to his contributions because they were actually, kind of a fun fact, working on both their different artworks around the same time. So, what is the form of this artwork? We're seeing a lot of illusion of space. It's kind of divided on a right and left side. If you can see, on the left side, I'm observing that more people are engaged in their own studies. And on the right side, people are more engaged in conversation. That's just how I interpret it. So, there is kind of a division. We're also seeing an influence of Roman ruins in the background, especially these arches. They're more classical, and Raphael used the Roman ruins to get inspiration from the inside of the School of Athens. Raphael also purposely individualized people, so we're not seeing a lot in medieval art, everyone would look kind of the same. Now we're seeing people's distinct facial features and hairstyles and clothing. There's also horizontal groupings of people. So those were my key annotations for the School of Athens painting. So now let's move on to our next artwork. So this is Venus of Urbino by Titian, and it's an oil on canvas painting. So, as of the subject matter, a lot of art historians are unsure of who the woman could be. It could either be the goddess Venus, a young bride, or an idealized female beauty. We see a lot of work by Titian that's commissioned by Giobaldo, who was a duke of Urbino. So we see a lot of the theme of this woman being portrayed, and we can't tell if this is Venus, the young bride, or maybe even a mistress or a courtesan. The function of this artwork was to be viewed in a private room for Giobaldo della Roverte. He commissioned many of these portraits for private viewing in a room, and it may have commemorated his 1534 wedding. So, because we are seeing some symbolism of marriage in the painting, so in the back we see a chest, and these are servants kind of looking through a chest, and this was a wedding chest. And we art historians have pointed out that it is a wedding chest, so there's more clues pointing out that it could be in fact his wife. But we also see over here a dog, which could have been a gift. And it also is a symbol of fidelity. So that is another thing to point out. The rose signifies beauty and hurt with love. And let's talk about more of the actual form of the painting. We're seeing that it has beautifully rich covers of paint. So the real painting would have been kind of shiny, and because it had many layers and glazes of oil paint. And this painting was, I have to mention, scandalous for its time. It's something that obviously would have been in a private room because the woman is reclining nude. We can also see that the curtain is kind of it divides where you're gonna look. So it divides actually her from the people in the background. And her pelvis is the focal point of the composition. The artist also, like I said, applied translucent layers of paint. And another thing that is very important is that her hairstyle was historically common for women that were engaged. So we're seeing that this might have been an engaged woman. This woman corresponds to the image type known as belladonna, which means beautiful woman, which was popularized in Venus. And there are numerous variations of the Venus of Urbino because it was very there was a lot of variety in Renaissance Europe, and it was just very idealized. It was what you wanted to look like during that time. So it can make sense why the person that commissioned this would want to look at this person because she's very idealized. Okay, let's move on to our last work, which is a new category called Mannerism. So we have the Entombment of Christ. So, a little context about Mannerism was that it was a time of dance like elegance. So, in the Entombment of Christ, we're seeing a lot of elegance, a lot of movement, everyone's kind of flowing. We're also seeing that Christ, it's not very accurate. So, we know how Michelangelo wanted to be very accurate, and Raphael in their paintings, they wanted to make sure that people actually looked like people. Well, these people look like humans, and we recognize Christ. We can also see that his torso is oddly elongated, and it's kind of impossible that his weight could be carried by one person. There's also a lot of elegance with this painting. I'm noticing the flowy fabric and kind of impossible anatomy. So, yeah, there was a rejection of Renaissance clarity and naturalism in Mannerism. It's kind of the opposite. We're also seeing very loud colors. I would say they're almost neon in a way, they're very um, contrasted colors. So let's talk a little bit about who commissioned it and why. This was for a chapel that belonged to the Caponi family. They were a wealthy family from Florence, Italy. And like I said, if you commissioned things in the church and you had your name on them, it would help you have a greater chance of going to heaven, because that's a lot of why religious families wanted to commission this art. So there was a little bit of confusion as to what is going on in this painting. Art historians don't know if it's the deposition or if it's the throne of mercy, but it is the entombment of Christ. So the entombment of Christ is when Christ has been crucified and he's kind of getting ready for burial. And that's Mary Magdalene and Mary are in this painting because this is the entombment of Christ. I'd say this painting captures a lot of emotion, and that's something the artist wanted to convey in the expressions of the people holding Christ. They look very worried, especially the person to the very left, as we can see. So, Mannerism was just a move away from Renaissance style. There is no illusion of space, no linear atmospheric perspective. There is no sense of weight or accurate anatomy. So, yeah, this is the Entombment of Christ. I hope you learned a little bit from these notes from AP Art History. So, thank you for watching.